In 1988, I wrote 3 words in pencil in the margin of my seminary notebook. Just 3 words. Check Origen ref. I wrote it during a lecture. Next to the Josephus reference, the passage that every New Testament course in America holds up as external proof of Jesus from a non-Christian source. And then I closed the notebook, put it in a box, and the box went into a closet. And for 35 years, those 3 words sat there without an answer. This past January, I finally looked it up. I want to tell you what I found, but first I need to walk you through the passage itself, because before you can understand why those 3 pencil words mattered, you need to understand what the Josephus passage says, and what it doesn't say, and what nobody in my seminary class was ever asked to explain about it. Flavius Josephus was a Pharisee who survived the Jewish War of 66 to 73 AD by defecting to the Roman side. He spent the rest of his life in Rome, writing Jewish history for Roman and Jewish audiences. He was not a Christian. He never converted. He had every professional reason to be careful about messianic movements. The Romans had just crushed one violently, and his own reputation depended on appearing responsible and sober. He published his Jewish Antiquities, 20 volumes, in approximately 93 AD. And in Book 18, Chapter 3, Paragraph 3, something appears. Something that every seminary professor I ever had called the most important external confirmation of Jesus we have. Here's what it says. It's what? Now around this time there lived a wise man, if indeed one ought to call him a man, for he was a doer of astonishing deeds, a teacher of people who received the truth with pleasure, and he won over many Jews and many of Greek origin. He was the Christ. And when Pilate, on the accusation of the principal men among us, condemned him to the cross, those who had loved him from the very first did not cease. He appeared to them on the 3rd day again, having been restored to life as the divine prophets had spoken of these, and countless other miraculous things about him. And the tribe of Christians, so named after him, has not disappeared to this day. That's the paragraph, that's the anchor. That's what my professor underlined in blue felt-tip pen and wrote in the margin, external confirmation. Underline twice. Stay with me on this. Let me read 3 phrases from that paragraph back to you. Just 3. The first, if indeed one ought to call him a man. Think about who is writing this. A Pharisee historian writing Roman propaganda. He has just described Theudas the rebel, the Egyptian agitator, other messianic claimants in Judea. He doesn't hedge any of them. He doesn't say Simon Bar Giora, if it is lawful to call him a man. That language, if it is lawful to call him a man, is the language of someone affirming divinity. That's the language of the Gospel of John. That is not how a non-believing Jewish historian describes a preacher. The second phrase, he was the Christ, Christos, the Messiah. Not he was called the Christ by his followers. Not some believed him to be the Christ. He was the Christ. That is a confession of faith. Josephus elsewhere writes about other figures who claim to be the Messiah. He describes them as troublemakers. Why in this single paragraph does the careful historian make a theological declaration? The third, he appeared to them on the 3rd day, having been restored to life, as the divine prophets had spoken. Not they claimed he appeared, not his followers reported. Josephus asserts the resurrection as historical fact. A Pharisee who never converted is recording a miracle as objective truth. Now, scholars have debated this passage for centuries. The mainstream position, held by historians like John Meyer and Louis Feldman, is called partial interpolation. The idea that Josephus did write something about Jesus, something brief and relatively neutral, and that Christian copyists later added the confessional phrases. This is the polite scholarly consensus. Josephus wrote something. Someone edited it. And for a long time I found that reasonable. But here's what I noticed when I went back and read the whole chapter. Just before the Jesus paragraph, Josephus is writing about a scandal involving the priests of Isis and a Roman matron. Just after it, he's back to the expulsion of Jews from Rome under Tiberius. These are Roman political disturbances, one after another, and right in the middle of that catalogue sits a glowing theological portrait written in the voice of a believer. It reads like someone spliced a paragraph from a devotional commentary into the middle of a newspaper report. The tone lifts. The sentence structure changes. Then Josephus comes back and continues his political narrative as if nothing happened. That paragraph does not feel like it belongs where it is. Here's the thing that took my breath away when I finally saw it. If this passage existed, in any form, even a mild form, in the decades after Josephus published the Antiquities in 93 AD, the early Christian apologists would have used it constantly. They needed it desperately. Justin Martyr, writing around 155 AD, was making the case for Christianity directly to the Roman emperor. He cited alleged records of Pilate, records nobody has ever found. He cited Old Testament prophecy. He pulled in everything he could. He never cited Josephus. Irenaeus of Lyon, writing around 180 AD, was fighting the Gnostic interpretation of Christianity. He cited dozens of sources across 5 volumes. He never cited Josephus on Jesus. Clement of Alexandria, around 200 AD. Tertullian, around 200 AD. A Roman lawyer, one of the most aggressive defenders of the faith in the early church, writing specifically to reach educated Romans who demanded evidence. Hippolytus, around 235 AD. None of them, not one. These men were fighting for the credibility of Christianity in a skeptical world. If they had access to a passage from the most famous Jewish historian of the first century that said he was the Christ and described the resurrection as historical fact, they would have quoted it in every argument they made. The silence is not ambiguous, it is absolute. 200 years of absolute silence from people who had every reason to break it. The first person to quote the Testimonium Flavianum is Eusebius of Caesarea, around 324 AD. The official historian of the early church, the biographer of Constantine, the man who did more than anyone else to shape the canonical narrative of Christian origins. 230 years after Josephus wrote his Antiquities, Eusebius worked at the great library and scriptorium of Caesarea, one of the most important centers in the ancient world for copying, preserving, and distributing manuscripts. If you needed an addition to a historical text to survive into subsequent copies, a scriptorium in Caesarea is precisely where you would do it, and Eusebius is precisely who you would need to quote it first. I'm not saying Eusebius forged it. I don't know what happened in that scriptorium. I'm saying the timeline of the 230-year silence, the sudden appearance at Eusebius, the location of both, is a pattern that needs an explanation. And no one in my seminary class was ever asked to explain it. Now, those 3 pencil words, check Origen ref. The notebook was spiral-bound, the cover a faded blue, the pages gone brown at the edges and slightly stiff with age. Introduction to the New Testament, fall semester. Maybe 1988 or 89. I'd written the lecture notes in blue ink. Dates, references, citations. The careful handwriting of a student who believed everything he was being told was important. And there, next to the Josephus reference in pencil, in writing that looked more like I was thinking than taking notes, check Origen ref. I must have heard something in the lecture. Some passing mention of Origen in connection with this passage. Maybe the professor said something like some scholars cite Origen here and moved on. I wrote the note the way you write something when you mean to look it up later and then don't. 35 years. This past January, I finally opened Origen's Contra Celsum, against Celsus, written around 248 AD. Origen was one of the most brilliant scholars early Christianity produced. He read everything. He cited everything. He was particularly thorough about Josephus. In Contra Celsum, Book 1, Chapter 47, Origen is discussing the death of James, the brother of Jesus. He refers to a passage in Josephus, not the Testimonium, but the other passage about James's death in Antiquities 20. And then Origen adds a phrase, a subordinate clause, almost as an aside. He says that Josephus was a man who did not accept Jesus as the Christ. And in his commentary on the Gospel of Matthew, Book 10, Chapter 17, he says it again. Same framing, same explicit statement. Although he himself did not believe in Jesus as the Christ, I need you to hear this clearly. Origen, reading his copy of Josephus in 248 AD, says Josephus did not believe in Jesus as the Christ. Now hold that against the Testimonium Flavianum, the passage that says he was the Christ, that says he appeared alive on the 3rd day, that records these things as historical fact. These cannot both be true. If Josephus had written he was the Christ in any copy Origen could access, Origen could not have written that Josephus did not believe in Jesus as the Christ. A man who writes he was the Christ has, by definition, stated that he believed in Jesus as the Christ. Those words are not ambiguous. The contradiction is not subtle. The only explanation that fits both pieces of evidence is this: Origen's copy of Josephus did not contain the testimonium as we have it today. The passage, or at least the specifically Christian phrases, was added to the manuscript tradition sometime after Origen wrote, around 248 AD, and before Eusebius quoted it, around 324 AD. Somewhere in that 75-year window in a scriptorium, a scribe sat down. There was a copy of Josephus's Antiquities open in front of him, and where Josephus had written something about Jesus, something brief, perhaps neutral, perhaps even mildly critical. The scribe took his quill and he wrote more. He wrote he was the Christ. He wrote the resurrection. He wrote the language of faith into the language of history, not with malice, probably, with devotion, with the certainty that Josephus should have written these things even if he didn't. That's what the evidence points to. Not a conspiracy, a pious addition, in a room with dark ink between 250 and 324 AD. And the pencil note I wrote in 1988 pointed straight at it. The system I was educated in never encouraged me to follow up on it. 35 years, I'm done not asking. In 1971, a scholar named Shlomo Pines, a professor at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, published a discovery that deserved far more attention than it got. He had been reading the chronicle of a medieval Christian bishop named Agapius, who wrote a world history in Arabic around 941 AD. Agapius was a Melkite Christian, Eastern Orthodox, not Roman Catholic, and in his chronicle he quoted Josephus's passage about Jesus, in Arabic, with a substantially different text. Here's what Agapius's version says. At this time there was a wise man who was called Jesus. His conduct was good, and he was known to be virtuous, and many people from among the Jews and other nations became his disciples. Pilate condemned him to be crucified and to die. But those who had become his disciples did not abandon his discipleship. They reported that he had appeared to them 3 days after his crucifixion and that he was alive. Accordingly, he was perhaps the Messiah, concerning whom the prophets have recounted wonders. Read both versions side by side. The Greek version says wise man, if indeed one ought to call him a man. The Arabic says simply wise man. The Greek says he was the Christ. The Arabic says he was perhaps the Messiah. That one word, as perhaps, is a complete reversal of meaning. Perhaps is a historian recording a claim. He was the Christ is a believer making a confession. And the resurrection. The Greek asserts it as fact. He appeared to them on the third day, having been restored to life. The Arabic says they reported that he had appeared. Reported. That's how you write history. That's how you record what a group claimed without affirming the miracle yourself. Now I want to be honest with you. A scholar named Alice Wheely published research in 2008 arguing that Agapius's Arabic text most likely derives from a Syriac translation of Josephus that traces back through Eusebius, not from an independent manuscript that predates him. The Arabic might be a softened version of Eusebius's Greek, not a purer window into what Josephus originally wrote. That's the current majority view among scholars. I'm not in a position to argue with it. But even if that's right, even if the Arabic is just a mellower version of the Greek, notice what was preserved. A 10th century Christian bishop writing a world history in Arabic felt comfortable with the word, perhaps. He was perhaps the Messiah. In the most Christian-friendly possible transmission of this text, through centuries of copying by Christian hands, someone kept the word perhaps. The Greek testimonium has no perhaps. Somewhere between Agapius and the Greek manuscripts, your seminary textbook quotes, "The perhaps became, he was the Christ." The direction of that change matters. Now let me come back to the title of this video. A Jewish historian named Jesus' father in 93 AD. Here's what I mean by that. Josephus wrote 20 books of Antiquities. He was meticulous about genealogy. He names people by their father, by their grandfather, by their tribe. That's how ancient historians established that they were talking about real individuals in a real social world. For Jesus, here is what Josephus gives us in any passage that scholars consider authentic. One reference in Antiquities 20, chapter 9, paragraph 1, that mentions James, the brother of Jesus, who is called Christ. That's all. James, identified by his brother. No father named, no mother named, no lineage, no tribe. Joseph is never mentioned by Josephus, not once. In 20 volumes of Jewish genealogy, the man whose followers became one of the world's largest religious movements leaves no father's name in the work of the most detailed Jewish historian of the 1st century. So who in the era of Josephus was naming Jesus' father? There was someone, and the record survived, ironically, because a man who thought he was refuting it wrote it down. Around 178 AD, a Greek philosopher named Celsus wrote an attack on Christianity called the True Word. The original is almost entirely lost. We only know it through Origen, who quoted it at length in Contra Celsum while answering it. In Contra Celsum, Book 1, Chapter 32, Origen quotes Celsus presenting what he says is a Jewish accusation against the Nativity story. The accusation says that Mary was found to have conceived not by Joseph, but by a Roman soldier, and the soldier's name, Celsus says, was Panthera, or Pantera, the transliterations vary. Origen dismisses this completely. He points out that the name Panthera might itself be a deliberate pun on the Greek word Parthenos, meaning virgin. As in, the story of the virgin birth, Parthenos, mocked by replacing the word with a soldier named Panthera. A contemptuous joke. Or maybe it wasn't a joke. Maybe Panthera was a name someone actually remembered. In October of 1859, workers laying railroad tracks near a small town called Bingerbrook, close to Bingen am Rhein, in what is now the state of Rhineland-Palatinate in western Germany, dug up something they weren't expecting. 9 Roman military tombstones, 9 soldiers buried together, almost certainly part of a garrison that had served on the Rhine frontier. One of the inscriptions read, Tiberius Julius Abdes Pantera, from Sidon, aged 62 years, served 40 years. First cohort of archers. He lies here. The inscription is catalogued in the Corpus Inscriptionum Latinarum as number 13, 7514, CIL 13, 7514. Abdes is an Aramaic name. It means servant of God. The man was from Sidon on the coast of Phoenicia, modern Lebanon, some ancient Semitic background. His cohort, the first cohort of archers, was stationed in Judea and the regions around it during the reign of Tiberius, roughly from 6 to about 36 AD, before being assigned to the Rhine frontier. If he was 62 when he died and served 40 years, he entered military service around 22 BC. He was an active soldier in the right place, Palestine under Roman occupation, at the right time. The tombstone is real. It's in the Römerhalle Museum in Bad Kreuznach, Germany right now. I found a photograph of it this past winter, researching this video. It's a stone slab about the height of a man's torso, the Latin letters carved clean and deep, the edges worn and rough with age. There's something about seeing a physical object, even in a photograph, even on a screen, that changes the weight of a historical argument. It stops being abstract. I want to be precise. This is not proof of anything. The name Panthera appears in other Roman military inscriptions. It was not an unusual nickname for a soldier. The claim that this specific Tiberius Julius Abdes Pantera from Sidon fathered a child in Judea who became Jesus of Nazareth is speculation that serious scholars don't make. But here is what's true. In 178 AD, within living memory of people who might have known people who knew Jesus, an educated Greek philosopher knew a specific name for Jesus' alleged father, not just a type, not just a soldier, a name, Panthera. A name that appears on a tombstone of a soldier who was in the right place at the right time. None of that. Not Celsus, not the name, not the tombstone sitting in a German museum, was ever mentioned in a single class I took. Not once. In 1670, Baruch Spinoza published a book in Amsterdam with no author name on the cover. A fake publishing house on the title page. A fake city of origin. No dedication, no identifying preface. He published it that way because the last man who had written something like it, a friend named Adrian Korbag, had been sentenced to 10 years in a workhouse, followed by 10 years of exile. Korbag died before the first 10 years were up. Spinoza knew what happened to people who said certain things out loud. In chapter 8 of the Tractatus Theologico-Politicus, Spinoza makes an argument about how sacred texts become corrupted, not through dramatic conspiracies, not through councils voting on what to change, through the slow accumulation of pious additions by well-meaning scribes who copied manuscripts and could not always resist the impulse to clarify, to strengthen, to make a neutral text more useful. He writes about glosses, marginal notes that get copied into the main text by the next scribe. He writes about harmonizations, passages adjusted so that one book agrees with another. He writes about interpolations, entire paragraphs added to fill a gap that a devout copyist believed should not exist. He says, scribes had both the motive and the means. They were copying texts they considered sacred. They believed those texts should say certain things. And when a text didn't quite say those things, the temptation to help it along was, for some of them, irresistible. He was not writing about Josephus. He was writing about Moses and the books of the Torah. He was writing about the Hebrew Bible. He had only text, no archaeology, no Arabic manuscripts, no pencil notes in seminary notebooks. But he described exactly what the evidence points to in Antiquities 18, chapter 3, paragraph 3. Someone in a scriptorium in Caesarea, sometime between 250 and 324 AD, opened a manuscript of Josephus and found a passage about Jesus. Whatever that original passage said, it wasn't enough, and so they made it say more. He was the Christ. He appeared alive on the third day, as the divine prophets had spoken. They wrote it with ink that was probably slightly different from the ink around it, and then they handed the manuscript on. Origen, reading his copy in 248, said Josephus did not believe. Eusebius, reading his copy in 324, quoted a Josephus who confessed the faith. The gap between those two readings is where the addition happened. Spinoza identified the mechanism in 1670. The Arabic version showed us the shape of the original in 1971. The Origen contradiction has been sitting in plain sight since 248 AD. Now, I want to be careful about something before I close. None of what I've told you today proves Jesus didn't exist. The James passage in Antiquities 20, the one Origen himself cites, the one that virtually all scholars consider authentic, still refers to Jesus. The most skeptical historians in the field still believe a historical person named Jesus lived and was crucified in 1st century Judea. What this evidence questions is not Jesus, it's the need. The need someone felt in the 3rd or 4th century to make a Jewish historian say things that Jewish historian never said. If the faith is true, it doesn't need a forged footnote. I wrote that on a sticky note when I finished the research for this video. I stuck it on my monitor because the question it raises isn't ultimately about ancient history. It's about what we're willing to ask, about the notes in the margins of our own thinking that we write down in pencil and then never look up. I spent 35 years not following up on 3 words. If you've been carrying a question like that, something that nagged at you in a class, something a pastor said that didn't quite add up, something you wrote down meaning to check it and then let sit, tell me in the comments, what is it? Because that's where the real work starts, not with Josephus, not with Origen, with the pencil notes we wrote to ourselves and then forgot about. I read every single one. Take care of yourselves.